Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Good Grief Life After Loss. Today's episode is a very special one for me. It is one that is long overdue because today I am sitting down with my dad, Ron Jackenthal, someone who didn't just experience the same loss as me, but experienced it in a completely different way. Because while I lost a brother, he lost a son, which is what we are going to talk about today. My dad, Ron Jackenthal, was living a very full, successful life before Sam passed away. He was very deep into his career, building, providing, doing all the things you're supposed to do. And then in an instant, everything changed. And what I've always found so powerful about my dad's story is not just the loss, but what came after. The decision to not only just carry the grief, but to do something with it, to turn something unimaginably painful into something that brings light, connection, and support to so many other people who are walking through loss. He left behind the career he had built and stepped into something completely different, which is creating the Live Like Sam Foundation in honor of Sam. And through that, he's become a source of support for so many other grieving families while still navigating his own grief journey at the same time. In this conversation, we talk about who he was before Sam died, how grief has changed him, what it's like to lose a child, and how loss reshaped our relationship as a father and daughter. We'll also talk about purpose, about whether healing can come from helping others, and what it looks like to carry both pain and love at the same time. This episode is for anyone who has experienced loss, but especially for parents and for people who are trying to figure out how to keep going after their world has been turned upside down. So Ron, father, welcome to Good Grief.
Thank you, Skylar, daughter. It's great to be here. It's great to see you online.
Kicking it off with a hot start to the interview. Who would you say you were as a person and as a dad before we lost Sam?
Well, I don't think we have that much time. However, I think you did a really good job. Life was good. I was in a career that I didn't love, but I liked. I got to live in Park City, Utah. Your mom and I divorced when you were 4 and your brother was 6, and we decided to raise the kids here. And I mean, what a magical place to raise kids. And divorce isn't easy, but I think we did the best we could. And I think, as you know, we had a lot of comments from the peanut gallery here locally, how great we did as, divorced parents, making the kids a priority. And, we got to raise you and your brother, Sam, here in Park City, which is a really magical place. And I think, right leading up to the time of your brother's accident and the month of him being in the hospital in Australia and our journey, I really felt like, with the exception of a few things I wanted to see maybe a little better, like a career that stimulated me more and kind of like finding like a love of my life. Things were great. You guys were thriving. You were both doing your own thing. You were soccer and track and school, and you had a great group of friends. Sam was thriving with skiing and rollerblading, and the same with school. And then one Sunday night we got a phone call.
We don't have to touch on it too much, but can you tell me what you remember about like that phone call in that moment?
Yeah. So I was in a Whole Foods supermarket at about 8:00 on a Sunday night. It's 15 or 16 hour time difference between, here and Australia. And Chris Haslock's former Olympian and Sam's coach, and really your brother's second dad, we would all say. I saw Hatch calling me from his phone, and I knew he was in the U.S., but your brother and, his 7 or 8 teammates and the Olympic, U.S. ski team coaches, they were all in Australia together. And when I saw Hatch call, before I picked it up, I just had a feeling like, I just kind of thought ahead, like what time it was in Australia, the fact that he was calling me, and it made me go, okay, now what? What's happened now? And then, I talked to Hatch, and I could hear right from the get-go that your brother had a really bad accident, skiing, and he had been life flighted to Canberra, which is their version, like the Australian Washington, D.C., the country's capital. and he was in the hospital, and he was in bad shape. And so, kind of right then and there, I knew we were in for a different journey than we had been in before. This was not anywhere near the first time that I got a call from Hatch or one of the other coaches that Sam had been hurt or something had happened, because Sam threw big tricks and went at life hard and went at skiing and skating hard, but this one felt different, and obviously it was.
Yeah, I actually am not sure I've heard you tell that side of the story to me, because obviously I only got the other side, which was you called mom and then mom told me at the time, and then I think you came over right after that. But it's so interesting, like I was saying in the beginning of this, that like we experienced the same loss but in very different ways. And I think even from the like point of finding out, obviously it just like started the fact that they were very different journeys in the process.
So I'd say one other thing that you were sheltered from. So I mean, there was probably an hour plus of time after I got off the phone with Hatch that I got on the phone with somebody at the hospital in Australia who we got to know and love in our journey. Beck, she was the patient advocate. So she was like the scrum leader or the family advocate for a patient and their family, to be the go-between between like all the doctors and all the experts and what's going on, and that was something that I felt really strongly about. Before calling you and your mom, I just wanted to talk to the hospital and hear it from them. And being Australian and the fact that it's like nationalized medicine, I think we would all agree that it was a very different journey than had it happened in the US, because if you're going to sue the hospital, you're suing the government. And so I think they're not worried about malpractice, and they're also just very straightforward, tell it like it is, people. And so, I mean, that 45-minute to an hour conversation I had with Beck after talking to Sam's coach and before calling your mother was pretty intense. It was, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You guys need to get on a plane as soon as you can. He's in bad shape. We don't know if he'll make it through the night. Still a lot to learn. He's going under a lot of tests. And so like, I felt like that was my responsibility as the dad. And even though your mom and I were divorced, but to some degree, maybe as a provider, I don't know, just like, it felt like it was my role to get to the bottom of it and then evaluate like how bad things were. And she just laid it on the line. I mean, when she said, how fast can you get on a plane? And we know how long it took to get there. It took over 50 hours to get there from the time we got the phone call, just with flight schedules and having to fly from here to LA and overlay, and then LA to Sydney, and then Sydney to Canberra, and Canberra to the hospital. So, I don't know if you ever heard that side of the story, but
No, I didn't. Very interesting. I'm curious, you saying that like that's the role you felt like you had to take on in that moment. What role do you feel like you took on or felt obligated to take on during the month when we were in Australia and Sam was in the hospital?
I think the biggest thing for me, right, like as a parent, and I'm not saying like it's as the dad versus the mom, but like as a parent, I feel like part of my my responsibilities are to protect my children, right? Protect your brother from getting hurt, protect you at 14 from going through the pain of seeing your brother in a coma with, tubes and wires and electronics in an emergency room, in a trauma center that was very chaotic. And it was really unsettling, right? Like, obviously, like, I love you and your brother dearly, and I don't want to see either one of you hurt, but it was really it definitely messed with my head, like my sense of being, because my job's to protect, part of my job as the parent is to protect the kids. And I felt like I wasn't able to do that. And, a little bit of it was, did I push him too hard? Did I encourage him too much? And I think, well, I did do those things. And after your brother passed away, I mean, that's just part of grief. You negotiate, it's one of the stages. If you kind of follow that path, but the reality is like Sam was going to do what Sam was going to do. He may have had less money or less access, but he was going to figure out how to jump, how to flip, how to compete. how to express himself on skis and skates, and how to be upside down and inverted more than being on the ground and on his feet.
That is very true. Before I move on from Australia, is there anything else that I should be asking you about or that you wanted to talk about?
You know, I mean, we can certainly we could talk about any of it, right? Like we could talk about the monotony of, like, day in, day out, waiting for a sign, waiting for there was a finger twitch, and what did that mean? Like, you reading that children's book to him time and time again. You and your mother had a much greater capacity to, like, sit with him and be still and be present, and I had a hard time looking at him. It just definitely rattled my cage. Like, I think I felt the need to create a social media campaign at home and feed the community information. That was sort of my way, I think, of distracting myself, because I couldn't bear, like you had asked earlier about, or when we talked about what was life like before, like, life was pretty good. And I think a lot of it was, I also felt like, with the stage of him being 16 and you being 14, and in such an important stage of your life, I was fortunate enough to be able to work kind of creatively and remotely. And so, like, you and your brother were such a huge part of my sense of, like, purpose, and seeing half of my purpose in a coma, and knowing that potentially he may not come out of that coma, was really tough. And I think the way I dealt with it is, instead of facing it, I kept busy, phone calls and emails and social posts, and being the conduit between us and everything that was going on back here at home, which was quite amazing, with vigils and fundraisers and outpouring of love from everybody. And I think, this I do say often, like with the foundation, I mean, with the backstory, like, this could have been anybody's kid, right? It just happened to be ours. We had the one seat you didn't want, which was that front row family seat. But it could have been anybody's kid that, had an accident. It could have been choking on a checker or slipping on a skateboard. His was throwing a trick skiing, and something he's done thousands of times. He just landed wrong and had a head injury, and then we know the rest.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about how, like, keeping in touch with everyone from Park City was an escape, because that is definitely something I remember from the time, is like the way you and mom, I feel like, were like just very different in that situation, which of course everyone's different. But as you were talking, I feel like that also got me thinking that I think part of the reason why our story and Sam's story got so big in Park City is because we communicated so much. Like, people were actually getting live updates. People were hearing from the family, hearing from you, whereas in other situations where it's a lot less public and a lot more private, like, you don't know any details, you don't know what happened, you just know something bad happened, which I feel like that was almost like the starting point maybe of Live Like Sam and of the community being so involved, because we were so vocal about it and there was so much access to information and knowledge about our situation.
Yeah, I mean, I quite frankly, I haven't thought about that either, but I do think, like, the genesis of the foundation really started with us being in Australia and having just, like, all of these thousands of people pulling for us and rooting for us. And, we would get the slightest bit of potentially possible improvement. And we're talking, like, fractions of, like, decimal places out of improvement. And, one of us might share that, like, hey, there was some positive signs today. And I think that gave people hope. And, I think, I've lived a full life and lived a lot of places and collected a lot of people along the way in a lot of different countries and cities. And, they were following our journey, on Facebook specifically. And so was Park City. And so was the ski community. And so I think, this was like, you almost couldn't have scripted something better to get people to rally behind a cause, right? Like, cheering for the underdog and wanting to see, like, Sam pull through. And I mean, and I think that also that certainly kept me going as well, right? For me, that was medicine. The alternative sucked.
Yes, I would agree. And I would agree that, like, at the sign of any finger twitch or any positive news, we were sharing that with the world, because I think we also believed it at the time and thought that that was good and had meant something could happen. But I guess shifting away from Australia, what would you say grief in losing Sam has taken from you? And also, if anything, like what has it given you?
You know, it's, I would say, I mean, there's a million ways to answer it. I'll try to pick less than a million. When I think about, what it's taken, it, I felt, I really I was really happy with the way things were developing in our family and the way you and your brother were developing. Like, you guys were really close and you were great friends. And I just feel like, the universe was good. Like, things were good. They were lining up. Sam was happy. You were happy. You guys were well adjusted. Everything was going really well. You now at 24, and I'm so proud of you. Like, you've gotten to see the beginnings still of like who you could become, who you have become, and who you might become, right? Like, you have gotten to see what happens past age 16. You've gotten to like experience that. And I've gotten to, ride shotgun and experience that with you. And I think for me, the greatest thing that makes me sad, besides, the day-to-day of not having your brother here, is that Sam never got a chance to see who Sam could become. And right. And whether it was his athletics or his academics or just his life in general, like, his life got cut short at 16. And, I felt like he felt like he was going places. You certainly couldn't talk him out of anything but that, right? Like, he was going places. He was going to be in the Olympics. He was going to be in the X game. He was going to be a veterinarian. Don't think he really understood what the grades had to be for that, or the sacrifices, or the time. But he was going to be all of those things. And, he was on fire. And, so for me, it does break my heart that Sam never got a chance to see for himself who he could become, what was possible beyond, that one last final jump where he threw himself, probably 60 feet across the air. And I could only imagine, your brother, but he probably went, oh, fuck. And I truly believe, I choose to believe that at that moment, your brother just went, wow, you know what? Hey, buddy, I know I've broken you a lot of times and you've taken me lots of places, but it's time for us to say goodbye. Thanks for all you've done for me. I'm out of here. I got other stuff to accomplish. And somewhere between the time his skis left the ground and he came crashing down on the ground, I really feel like his spirit and his essence just took off and just headed up to the sky and decided to figure out what mischief he can get in while still making a big difference in the world.
Well, now I'm crying. You know what? Oh, God. Oh, fuck. I also realized that, like, as much as we do the Live Like Sam work and hear each other talk about this, like, we don't actually like talk about this because we talk about it so much, but to other people. So, okay, shifting gears to maybe lighter things, probably not, we'll find out. Was there a specific moment for you when you realized, like, I can't just go back to my old life and the way things were, like, I've experienced this great loss and I need to change my life and do something bigger with it?
Yeah, I mean, it took a while. And by the way, it's fun to be able to see you on a video call as we're doing this, because I don't think I've seen you cry since Shadow, chewed on your stuffed animal and, ate one of the eyeballs and you got upset. So it's
valid fun. Reason to cry.
It's fun to have. Yes, that was a beautiful lamb. I think to me, the moments, like, not one specific, definitely not one specific. It built up, right? And I talk about this with people, and I'm very public about my journey, for me and how the foundation got started. But I think, for me, like, I tried to put on my best face as I always do, right? Most people see me in community and I'm smiling and I'm cracking jokes and I try to be upbeat and positive. And obviously there's a lot of pain, that we all feel pain and we all deal with it differently. I tend to try to mask it and overshadow it by like deflecting. And so I'd never experienced pain like this. I mean, I lost my best friend growing up at 18. He was in a car accident. I've since lost both parents and others along the way. But this was obviously, at a level that that I've never experienced. And hopefully, others don't have to experience this. But I think for me, like the first 4 years after Sam died was like a lot of self-medicating, a lot of deflecting. Was really trying to put whatever energy I had into you between age 14 and 18 and get you launched into college. But there wasn't a lot of energy left, for me after that. And then, the story of, me finally saying, wow, like I'm either going to hit a wall or I need to like step out of my life in Park City and just do a reset. And so I went to a place called Onsite. I decided this on my own. And I went and, instead of, with the person I was dating at the time, looking at buying a place in, Mexico with them, I took, a lot of money and I went and invested it in myself over a 5-week period of time in Tennessee and checked in my tech and did a lot of work on like well-being and like grieving and healing and finding ways to say goodbye to your brother and try to get my feet on the ground. And so like my work with Onsite was sort of step one. It was me doing healing work for myself and giving myself like permission to grieve. And as somebody who holds their feelings like they did an exceptional job of helping me, over time, like express and heal. And then I did quite a bit of work through them after the fact, over the next year or two with a program they have called Life After Loss. It's for parents who've lost a kid. I started to see that like, holy shit, like 80% of the cause of death of, kids in their 20s or in their teens was overdose and suicide. And, I had struggled to figure out what to do with Sam's legacy besides what it was doing on its own. And I was struggling to figure out what to do with my own life. And then, there was really like, it wasn't like Mothers Against Drunk Driving where like there was cause and effect to go like start a foundation. But I did see really quickly that there's so many families losing kids in ways that were potentially preventable. And I could just see the pain and the havoc it's wreaked on them and that their chance of recovery was so low. And I actually felt grateful, right? Like, if we had to lose your brother, he was living his best life. He was having, an amazing life and he was so happy. And while I would be like, God, well, what if I didn't push him so hard or encourage him or give him money to travel to Australia or this or that, maybe he'd still be here. But the reality is, he would have still found a way to do what he did. And so I'm at peace with that side of me, but the parents who lose kids to overdose and suicide or things of that nature, they're in hell. And that was the impetus for me to start to look at what's going on with youth mental health around the country and locally. And as we both know, that was sort of became our why, right? Like if we could find ways of creating programming that teach kids to live a life similar, like inspired by your brother, not similar to your brother, but like, they don't have to be skiers. They don't have to be rollerbladers. They don't have to be joke tellers. But hopefully we can inspire kids to have a healthy sense of self and passion and boundaries and energy and goals and just live happy, be happy, right? And have a happy sense of self. Then I think we can change the world, one kid at a time. And I think that ultimately is what became our inspiration. But it took like 5 years before we got there.
It definitely did. And I also think that's like the inspiring part for people listening who are a few years into their grief journey and feel like they could be doing more, they should be doing more, they should be healed. Like it is such a process. And like you were saying, like the first 4 years was just like do your best to like focus on me, get me out to school before you could even take the time to focus on yourself and start healing and processing your grief. So to the people listening, there's just a lesson there of like, this doesn't happen overnight. It's a long process, but you can get there eventually.
Yeah, and I also think, Sky, like, there is no rule book, there is no playbook. Everybody has their own way that they need to go about it, and and there's no right or wrong. I have the privilege to work with a lot of people who lose kids. I mean that not privilege in them losing the kid, but this is something that's happened, and I get the opportunity to sometimes have like impact in a positive way and be a resource for people. And it's kind of 50-50. Some people, their heads in the sand and they're playing ostrich, and other people want to go out and they want to start a foundation, and they want to go start a national foundation, and they are ready to charge the world. And how much of that is deflecting versus like managing their pain? I think it's all over the place. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. There's no right or wrong journey. But I do think sort of like people who are getting divorced and they say, look, I'm ready to date. And I'm like, dude, there's the 2-year rule. And they're like, what's the 2-year rule? I'm like, you really have no idea what your new life's going to look like for a couple of years. Like, especially if you have kids, like you just have to settle into a new way of being. And I think there's a similar analogy with like losing a child or losing a loved one. Like, whether it's a sibling or a spouse or just someone you care about, a best friend, like time will tell how you're going to settle into your new life and what that new way of being is. And in the meantime, anything can happen. So I just try to encourage people to try to slow it down a little bit and try to like connect to their heart and listen to their feelings, and maybe just be mindful of not doing this as a way to mask the pain.
Very good point. Kind of going back to the decision, if we could say it wasn't really one point in time to start Live Like Sam, but at the time when you decided to leave your successful corporate sales job to officially pursue this different path of Live Like Sam, like what would you say were your biggest fears and doubts when deciding to choose to like go all in on the Live Like Sam Foundation?
The first one was no paycheck, right? That one was a pretty easy one to figure out. It's like there was no money, so there was no money for a paycheck. And I think I started to dabble in a little bit when I was working and earning a living. And then I realized like the only way to get this going is to jump in with both feet. And it just wasn't, we didn't have, access to an endowment. We didn't have access to a pot of money outside of some self-funding. So, as you know, like I initially self-funded this, through our money. And then we even had like our first fundraiser. We weren't even a 501c3, but we had our first fundraiser. And my goal was, to throw a $60,000, party for 100 people that we didn't lose money. And we actually wound up, making some money that helped kind of fuel the next year, and then so on and so forth. But another one that was huge for me, and it took me a while to figure it out. I've known this for some time now, but I didn't know it at the time, was that like imposter syndrome, right? Like 5 years ago when we, more or less really jumped into this, with both feet, like we knew it would be around youth and around well-being, but I don't think we knew how much it would be around like mental health. And then as that started to develop, I very quickly was like, who the hell am I to start a mental wellness nonprofit for youth when I come from a technology, sales leadership, and business development leadership background? Like, so that felt out of sync for me. And I often had a lot of self-doubt. And also like, if we're taking $1,000 out of the community for our nonprofit, then it could have gone to some other nonprofit that you could very easily see what they do. They provide this service to this, population, and they're making a difference. And so for the first few years, and we have talked about this, like I definitely felt like an imposter. Also maybe the last part was, this was my way of not letting go and my way of keeping Sam's memory going. And like, was that being selfish and self-serving and not balanced? And so there was a lot of that went on in the beginning too. Like, how arrogant of me or selfish of me to, do all of this to keep the word Sam in people's vocabulary, right? And keep Sam's memory alive. Um, and there was a lot of people looking at me in the community like, who is this guy and what is he doing? Like, he's raising money. What is he doing with the money? And we didn't even know we were raising money without even knowing what we wanted to do with it. And so I don't blame, in hindsight, I don't blame them, because I didn't know what we were going to do with it either. We knew we'd go to help kids, but we didn't have a plan, and that really came together in the last 3 years. And now I don't feel that way anymore.
In all fairness, there was a time period where we weren't even asking for money. People were just giving it to us. So it kind of ebbed and flowed. But obviously, Live Like Sam has become huge in the Park City community. It's so successful. I honestly don't think there's a school-aged child who doesn't at least know Live Like Sam or Sam's story or the logo, like, in some capacity. Do you feel like you anticipated it getting this big? Like, did you know it was going to be this big and have this much of an impact, or that's just kind of continued to develop and you really didn't know what it was going to turn into?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, in the beginning, absolutely not. I had no idea. Matter of fact, I still felt like I was, like fumbling a football, right? Like we had no idea. I really say I had no idea what this thing was going to become. And then, what I did know is, like, I spent my professional career selling and marketing like services and technology. And what the limiting factor in my career, often for me and my peers, wasn't like our capabilities, like as humans and what we could do to like promote. It was the marketability and how interested people were in our product or services in like the corporate world. And here, people were so supportive and interested in like keeping Sam's legacy going and being inspired how you and I could take something so horrific and painful and like do something so powerful with it and give back. And I think, people have just continued to still be like enamored at times with how we're able to show up in the world and put this in the forefront at whatever cost we have. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think, I didn't see it, but I knew we had something there. Like, no matter what, every time I would say we really don't have something here, somebody would show up and tell me a story, right? Like, do you know I met your son like when he was a busboy? Or do you know I met your son on a chairlift? Or did you know that Sam was my first kiss? Which was a fun chairlift story a few years ago. And so, but people would tell me these stories about like how he would show up and like help out their little kid, or makes, their kid was crying in the skate park, and Sam would encourage them and like take them and nurture them and show them how to skate and then make them laugh. And so there's been so many signs from the universe and so many signs from people we know and love and from complete strangers about like your brother, that I've had to learn to trust the process and to trust the universe and to just believe that there are no coincidences.
I love it. How do you feel like being Sam's dad and being the founder of Live Like Sam has changed like your role in the community and how others in the community see you?
Yeah, so there's probably more nonprofits or causes per capita in this community than almost any other community around the country. And it's a really beautiful place we live in with very generous people that support awesome causes. And I think as we've matured over 5 years, as we've matured over the last 5 years with our nonprofit, we started off impacting a couple of hundred kids. And last year we impacted close to 5,000 kids in our like neighboring counties. We are everywhere. We have great brand recognition. We have great success stories and impact. We've changed our focus a couple of times, until we landed where we've landed now over the last 3 years on kind of youth, mental and emotional fitness and, creating a generation of resilient youth. And so I think people really get what we're doing and they're really supportive of, like, we're filling a void that's critical. Like, we have a youth mental health crisis in the country. We certainly have one here locally and in our state, and we're doing something about it. And we're really hyper focused, and we're starting to make impact and have great results. So I think that results in people having great admiration for what the foundation's doing, and admiration, for you and I as the co-founders and me as the leader. Again, for me, like, going from imposter syndrome in the beginning to now, like, I'm really proud of what we've built. We have 6.5 full-time equivalent employees. We're in, over 20 schools. We're in 2 counties. We're working with, 5,000 kids, kindergarten through 12th grade, with 6 different programs and lots of community events. And it's starting to pay off. I think I may or may not have told you a story, but, Rowie, one of the founders of Vessel, a really successful, healthy restaurant chain that started here in Park City, this past summer, they were a sponsor for our fall event, and he and I were meeting, and he asked me to walk with him over to his daughter's, camp. And I think she's 6 or 7, and he wanted me to meet his daughter. He just introduced me to his daughter and said, "Hey, honey, this is my friend Ron, and he's Sam's dad, right? And so she wasn't born when your brother died." And he's like, "Honey, do you know who Sam is?" And she looked at him, very precocious, adorable girl, and said, "Dad, seriously? Everybody knows who Sam is." And he goes, "Well, what can you tell me about, Sam?" "Seriously, Dad? Sam was a skier and a skater, and he had an accident, and he was with the kangaroos, and he, unfortunately died in Australia. But most importantly, Sam was really positive, and he was like a friend to everybody, and he was kind, and he was funny, and he had a great bucket list with, like, all sorts of things that, like, he challenged himself to do. Everybody knows who Sam is." And I look at him, and he looks at me, and we both have tears coming out of the corner of our eyes. And here's a guy, who, like, I don't know how many years he was in the army, but, was like, carrying an Uzi, and, grew up in the Middle East, in a war zone. And, he fist bumps me and says, "Good job, Dad." And so, I am fortunate enough to be in the community every day, and I get these stories all the time. This one just hit really near to my heart, especially with the fact that, this girl wasn't even born for 3 or 4 years, until after your brother passed away.
You hadn't told me that. That's a very cute, sweet story. I'm curious if being in Park City is, like, obviously there's so many reminders of Sam, and everyone knows Sam and knows you. And even before Sam's accident, you were, like, already the mayor of Park City. We couldn't go to any grocery store because you knew everyone, and it was always a pain. But now, obviously, that has, like, 10x'd, and everyone knows you and Sam and our story. Has it ever crossed your mind? Have you ever felt the weight of that and, like, felt like you wanted to get out of Park City and get away from that? Or does it feel right for you to be in Park City and surrounded by all these people who know Sam's story?
So I believe, like, we've had, like, the most public private loss, not the hardest, not the biggest, just public loss in this community, especially with Sam being in the hospital, for the month. And, I don't know what my grief journey would look like if we were somewhere else, right? It's really hard to say. I can say that I really feel like 95% of the time or more, I don't think I would do it differently if I had to go through it again. Obviously, if I could change the outcome and your brother still be here, I would. But since that's not an option, I don't think I would change much. But it is not lost on me that there are times where I just wonder what it would be like if I wasn't surrounded by your brother's, logo or sticker, or people wearing bracelets or t-shirts or hats, or talking about, or it's my vocation now, like, it's my job, right? And because it's a family business, it's a 7-day a week, every day of the month job, right? So I talk about your brother every day. And, as someone who's like lost a best friend, who's lost parents, most people your age and up have lost somebody and will continue to lose somebody. I think generally speaking, like you lose somebody close to you, you think about them every second, every minute. And then, you catch yourself and it's like, I only thought about them once a day. And, you feel a little bad about that, but then time goes on and maybe you haven't thought about them for a week and all of a sudden it's a month. Right. And that's just generally what happens. I mean, but I do feel like I don't use the word, I'm not a guy who uses the word blessed a lot, but I actually feel blessed that we get to talk about Sam and celebrate Sam like so many times a day, every day, because in so many ways, like he's still here. I mean, he's bigger than life. Maybe the hardest part, like for me recently, was watching the Olympics in Italy. Like this, the last Olympics could have been his Olympics. This Olympics could have, possibly been his as well. And so again, I think for me, it's just finding ways of celebrating him. And this lets me do this. There's a generation of kids that know Sam. And I don't think we're there yet, but I think we're so close, Skylar. I think we're so close. Like this is a legacy for your brother and for us, not our only legacy, but this is like a legacy for our family and for your brother that I think has enough momentum that I think this will be here in perpetuity, at least in this greater community.
I would agree. Something I want to talk about, like, as you're saying how big Live Like Sam has gotten, I feel like I remember when I was in grief group and telling my story and almost feeling like there was like not ill will or jealousy. I don't know the word to describe it, but this feeling from the other people my age who like had also experienced such a painful, tragic loss at a young age, but no one knew about it. Like they were silently grieving and no one knew that they were a griever. They had lost someone. And obviously we don't have that luxury in some points, but like we also get that support because everyone knows. And so I'm curious, like I know you've done a lot of work with other grieving parents in the community. Do you feel like you've experienced that from other grieving parents of like Sam's story gets so much recognition and there are so many other stories and other losses that don't get talked about or of course just aren't as public as ours?
I definitely am hyper aware. Like, you've talked about this on your podcast before. We've talked about this outside of your podcast where like you're guarded now about the questions you ask people about, do you have brothers and sisters? Or do you like, tell me about your parents, because you just never know who's going to say, oh, my dad passed away, or I lost a sibling, or there's something really tragic that goes on. So, I too have gotten really aware to try to be as mindful as possible. I used to try to downplay our momentum because I felt like that was really hard for others to live up to. And I don't do that anymore. I just sort of like, they'll say something like about, wow, you've really done amazing things. It's incredible what you guys are doing or have done. And sometimes they'll talk about how they feel like they haven't done enough or they don't know what to do. And I'll generally ask for permission. Like, well, are you asking, do you want me to weigh in on this? As opposed to like in the beginning, I might like automatically weigh in like, well, we're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this. And then all of a sudden realize like, wow, what an asshole. Like I was completely insensitive to the fact that they're torn because it's so painful, right? Like what we do, I think, you and I both figured out how to do this without being in constant pain, but like we're talking about this, person who is incredibly important to both of us, like, my son, your brother, your best friend, like who's gone. And so it's just uniquely personal. And so I think for me, I just try to be as neutral as I know you do as possible. I'm there as a resource. I think I just want to see everybody be in the least amount of pain as possible. And like, I think success is experiencing your love for the person and managing your pain. It's not about having a foundation or things like that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's so different for everyone and everyone handles it in their own way. And what the way we do it is maybe not the best way either. Like there's just a different way to handle it for every person. Like I said, I know there's a lot of grieving and like freshly grieving parents who come to you or who are recommended to come to you. What do you feel like those parents need most in that moment? Like they're a few days, a few weeks freshly out of losing a child and they come to you. What do you feel like they're looking for, like you can give them in that moment?
I mean, what they're looking for, I can't give them, because what they're looking for is their loved one back. Right. And so to me, I think it's more about helping them just have a couple of nuggets to think about. Like, this is going to take a long time, right? This is going to be painful. This is going to shift from time to time. And like, you talked about one of your podcasts recently, like about laughter. Like, is it okay to have laughter while you have grief and loss? And it's like your emotions are going to be all over the place, and they're going to be showing up in ways that you've never seen, and I don't even know what to call them. And so I think for me, it's like, give yourself grace. I try to get people to at least maybe hear the message that it's really important to create space, to have safe people in your world. Your best friend for everything you do may not be your best friend for loss of somebody really close to you, because they just might be they might have the wrong wiring for what you really need, right? And I think we both saw this. I certainly did. There were people who I expected to show up for me, right or wrong, that did not. There's many people I thought would show up for me, mostly, that did, and they did in beautiful ways. And I think that was like such a important part of getting through the pain. But there were some people that have been, with me for my entire life, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to say. Or they just had the wrong things to say because they just didn't have the right words. And then there were people who I barely knew. I mean, think about our next door neighbor, Sandy, just like literally stopped her life with her son, and like they took on our life. And so I think, I found that there were people who I would have never expected to show up. So I think it's like, have a couple of key people in your life that can be the buffers to others. But again, like you might have to reverse engineer like your inner circle for a period of time. And just give yourself grace, right? And take care of yourself physically. Like the emotional part's really tough. It's hard to tell someone to do that. They're like, what the fuck are you talking about? How am I supposed to emotionally take care of myself? But I think to take care of yourself physically and spiritually and like nutritionally, I think those are things that you can encourage people to pay attention to, or those around them, to help guide them to make sure those things are there.
Something I did want to make sure you and I get to talk about, though, is our relationship and how it changed after losing Sam. And I think we had an incredible relationship both before and after and now. Like that was never a problem. But I do definitely think losing Sam like changed our dynamic. So I'm curious, as a parent, how do you feel like losing a child while still having another child here? Like, how did that change the way you show up as a dad?
Well, it's a super loaded question. We and I don't know that we've ever talked about this, but I mean, you can imagine like on the darkest of darkest days, like if I didn't have you alive and in my life, I don't know that I want it to be alive, right? Or I don't know who's to say what my path would have looked like had I not had like you, another child that I love, very much alive in my life to help me stay as present as possible when possible. So that's one thing, right? And I think for those that don't have others in their life, I could imagine it gets a little more complicated. It could get more complicated. Then there's things like just clutching at everything, right? I can remember, like leading up to you driving, right? And at the time, where we were living, It was like making a left-hand turn onto the busiest like 4-lane road without a stoplight, making a left-hand turn against the traffic going the wrong way. It's like a parent's worst nightmare. And so like, you know, worrying about losing you was front of mind. Like the most unbearable thing in my life had happened of losing a child. The second, would be losing another child. And so that was tricky, right? Like clutching on to you, not wanting to give you certain freedoms. Like you guys wanted to go like camping. And also like, I grew up at a time where there were no cell phones. We were wild growing up in 30 minutes outside of New York City. We were wild. Many of us are so lucky to be alive for the stupid and idiotic things that we did testing the waters as teenagers. And so like, while I didn't share with you, like most of the things I did and probably still haven't and may not ever, I knew in the back of my mind what teenagers were capable of, right? So here I am, I've lost a teenage son. I have a teenage daughter. Now you're driving, now you're dating, and everyone's pushing the limits. And this is a community here where there's a lot of haves and have-nots, but the reality is in today's day and age, like even 10 years ago, you guys have access to a lot more things that you can get hurt, I felt like, than we did when we were growing up, when the world was black and white. So it was just tough, right? It was just tricky, right? Like it was tricky for me to balance giving you your freedom and giving you your voice. And we definitely had moments of fighting over that. But a lot of, part of that was just who I was. And part of that was also the fact that I can't go through this again. So I'm just going to cling on really tight, and I think probably for me, and I think this worked out really well for both of us, but encouraging you to go to the East Coast for a month of college between your junior and senior year of high school and go to Babson, which you did eventually go to, and all of your years of college, encouraging you to do that served two purposes or multiple purposes. It got you to check them out and then to check you out. But it also served as another purpose, which was I got to see what it was like when you were a high school junior, not having you home and being an empty nester for a month. And I can remember find my friends, probably every hour, 18 hours a day, I would click on the app and be like, okay, I can see your dot on the college campus in one of the most affluent Boston's, suburban Boston, neighborhoods, Wellesley. I mean, there's not a lot that can go on there except for, maybe they overcharge you at Whole Foods. And, but I remember looking hourly, and then eventually it became bi-hourly. And then eventually you just bored me to death because you weren't doing anything but staying on campus. And then eventually, I got to trust, you were going to make good decisions. I also got to realize I don't control this, right? We talk about this all the time. We have, there's two things that we can control: our attitude and our activity. The reality is I can only help you become the best person possible. Same with your mom, same with other, key influences in your life. And then you're going to go experience life on its terms. And also part of why as a foundation we teach resilience is it's not a matter of if something's going to come your way as a human that's challenging. It's just a matter of when and how often and how intense and how prepared you are to roll with the punches. And so I just think for me, that wound up being really brilliant. And maybe the tale here for a parent who's lost a kid is find ways of letting out the yo-yo a little bit, giving the yo-yo some room to run, knowing you're still on the end of the string, but that you get to start to feel what it's like to let this person go live their life.
I mean, it's kind of a wonder I was ever allowed to then a year later go to Africa for a month, which is very different than Wellesley, Massachusetts. But Obviously, that was inevitable, but yes, I do remember you very much liked to find my phone for a few years there. I will say personally two things that I feel like stand out to me as big things that, and I don't even know if they've changed or as a result of losing Sam, but like one, I feel like you and I will never hang up the phone without you saying I love you. Like that's I feel like a very big thing for you. And maybe that was the case before Sam too. I don't know, but I noticed it so much more after. And two, now like you were saying, I think especially in the few years after losing Sam, there was a little tightening of the strings and holding on a little tightly, but within reason, of course. And I think it was hard for me to understand at the time, or almost felt like punished, like because of Sam, now I don't get to do these things. But I think it also took me like getting away and having a few years outside of that situation to fully understand, like, okay, yeah, that must actually be terrifying. And I know, like, when I'm home in Park City and you hear ambulance sirens, like, you call me immediately to make sure I'm okay, which I don't think is a thing many other parents experience or would do or would think. And like, it's sweet and also heartbreaking at the same time, but that's just like the reality of our
Well, I think those
situation.
parents are losers.
This is wild because I don't know if you can hear the sirens right now.
I can hear the sirens in the background, but I can also see you. So at least I have a feeling it's not an avatar.
Good
Um,
timing. We'll take it as a sign. We are very much over time. This has been lovely, but I have two more questions to wrap this up. So very much changing gears here. Given your entire life, everything you've experienced in the last 10 years since losing Sam, starting the foundation, all of it, what do you want your legacy to be?
I think about that sometimes, and I think the best I've got is it's really around you and your brother. Not that I won't do other things, in my life beyond Live Like Sam Foundation for work and for impact, but your brother gets to live another day, just not physically, and every day after that. So to me, ensuring that Live Like Sam is sustainable and impactful and carries your brother's legacy, or his sense of being, is a big part of what I want my legacy to be. I think about just being a good parent or a great parent, and having co-create two amazing kids, and that you guys are both doing things, obviously different physical forms, but you're both doing amazing things in the world and living a great life. And I think maybe the last part is just, I didn't grow up that I'm aware of, like, around philanthropy, like giving back or being of service wasn't something that my parents, I felt like, even ever talked about. I mean, maybe they made charitable donations or went to fundraisers. I don't know. I don't know. I felt like they were just struggling to, keep three kids going. But I was never of service until having lost Sam. Like, that was also something that wasn't important to me, because maybe I just didn't grow up with it and I didn't see the value of it. And I think maybe I was also too selfish with my time and money. Like, why go do something with my money for somebody else when I can do it for myself? And, since now, 10 years after losing Sam, being in this community, being a leader in the nonprofit world, I think it's really important. Like, I get so much more out of doing for others than I do for myself. And I get so much more out of being of service. And so maybe the last part of my legacy is that I was just a great steward of being of service, directly and indirectly. I think it's a tricky world out there, and you never know when somebody's hurting, and you never know the influence you can have on somebody by just showing up. But it's very rare that you can have any kind of impact for yourself or someone else when you isolate or when you're not putting yourself out there. And so, as you know, like, I continue to put myself out there. I think I just have a bit of a different lens. I think I'm more apt to try to see what I can do for somebody else than I can do for myself, unless, of course, it involves a new pair of, ski equipment, in which case then I come first.
Are those your famous last words on my podcast? You were doing so good up until that point.
I know. Well, this is coming from a guy who there's supposed to be another month of skiing here in Park City, and it's 70 degrees out and the mountain's melting. But no, look, like, I don't know, lemonade out of lemons, right? We have been dealt something that, no one should go through. And I think we're doing it. I think we're doing it with grace, and we're doing it with like a lot of thoughtfulness and mindfulness. And I think the other part that because you're a co-founder and you're also on the board of directors, we have 18 board members on our board, and all these people are very successful in their own way, in their own right, and they're all very busy, and most of them have kids, and they're in the peak of their kid raising years, and they all wholeheartedly believe in what we're doing, the need for what we're doing, why it's so important, and they dedicate their resources and their time, and it's that type of emotion where people show up for us that I think also helps us continue to want to show up for others. I mean, look at you starting this podcast, right? I know like some of this is you for you, and a lot of this is you for others. And so, you are a big part of my legacy.
Well said. That was a great way to end it. Well, Ron, father, whatever I shall call you in this professional setting, thank you very much for giving your time to come on the podcast to do this interview. This was super interesting for me. I feel like I learned a lot. I think as a kid, and as many kids, we don't often ask our parents enough questions or the right questions or deep enough questions. So this was really cool to just get to hear your perspective on things. And I see you in like a professional capacity running Live Like Sam every day, but it was really cool to hear this other side, and the side that isn't always shared with a broader audience. So thank you for sharing your wisdom. This was really cool, and I hope we get to do it again. Love ya.
Love you to the moon and back.